Hey folks, welcome to the Cripescast. This is the podcast we talk to people for and or from the Midwest. We are powered by Everlight Solar, and here is this week's episode. Hello folks, welcome back to another episode of the Cripescast. Today we are talking with Dr. Larry Pratt. Dr. Pratt, he's a Wisconsin guy. He's from Rhinelander. Go Hodag. Is that what they say in Rhinelander? Go Hodags. If you've never been to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, guys, there is just one of the most beautiful creatures to ever walk this globe. And yes, it's a real creature, the hodag. You can find the hodag in the woods of Rhinelander. But I would travel softly and carry a big stick because that thing apparently could be vicious. I don't know. Nice tangent, Charlie. Anyway, back to Dr. Pratt. He went to the University of Wisconsin for his bachelor's. He got his master's from the University of Wisconsin as well, and he is an expert in ocean currents. Why is that important? Because what's going through the currents? Microplastics, ladies and gentlemen. That's what this week's episode is mostly focused on, is microplastics. And the reason I'm focused on them is because there's a lot of studies out there that say there's so many microplastics in our waterways that they are in all of our brains, and they're in all of our blood, and it's in the air. So it's everywhere. There are some studies that are saying that the microplastics could be what's causing the rise in colon cancer cases amongst younger people. You hear that that cancer is on the rise amongst younger people, and some people are pointing to microplastics as a reason for that. But microplastics, what they do is it's basically like anything you get that is plastic, like whether it's a water bottle or a plastic bag, or we brought this up in the interview, but it's so annoying when you go to the hardware store and you want to buy a wrench, and for whatever reason, it's in plastic. It's like it's a wrench. I got no idea why they're doing it. Like it's so unnecessary. I think it's probably for some kind of advertising thing so it can hang or whatever. But, there's so much of this single-use plastic that it's just a problem, and it's everywhere, and very little of this plastic actually gets recycled. Something like 5% in the United States alone of all the recycling bins you see around, and all the people, if you at home are putting your stuff in the recycle bin, there is a good chance that plastic is indeed not getting recycled, and it's ending up in the oceans. And that's for a whole other podcast that we've actually done, which is on the economics of recycling and just the pure amount of plastic out there. So anyways, I get really into issues like this largely because, I don't think at the end of the day, any of us really want to be controlled by the government or by businesses. And I think a lot of times in politics, people kind of veer toward, I really don't want to be controlled by the government, or I really don't want to be controlled by big business. And that kind of is how you get the Democrat-Republican split. But I think what's common in all of us is we don't want to be controlled. And right now, we are kind of being controlled by the plastic industry and by the oil. The oil companies are the ones that make a lot of these plastics. So we are being controlled because I don't think any of us want this stuff in our water. And yet there it is. And a lot of the reason it is because they have done this whole greenwashing campaign saying, hey, you can recycle this stuff. They put the little recycling symbol on these plastic bottles or whatever. But the reality is they just don't get recycled. So anyways, the goal of this podcast is just help to understand how these microplastics are in our oceans, how they're moving, and sort of what we can do about it, what we can ask of our lawmakers in order to get a solution here to help us all out. And with that, ladies and gents, we are going to talk with Dr. Pratt. By the way, I should also mention he's got his PhD from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and MIT. And I got to tell you, it's a very interesting conversation. He's very informative about how just water moves. And these sort of things could help us figure out the best way to get these microplastics out of the water system. And then really the goal for all of us is to figure out how to not put them in to begin with. And that starts with our demand in not purchasing, our lack of demand for single-use plastics, and also just holding our elected people, holding them accountable and just saying like, hey, I don't want this stuff in my water anymore. What can we do? What laws can we do? Not to put unnecessary regulation out there, but at the same time, I don't think all of us need to be paying, the bill of the big plastic manufacturers. We shouldn't be the one paying the price so they can continue to profit off of things we don't need, like plastic wrapping, hard plastic wrap on a wrench. Dear God, that is a hat on the hat. Okay, unnecessary. Anyways, sorry, sometimes I slip onto a soapbox, guys, but it just grinds my gears a bit. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Pratt. Here you go. How's your day going? What you been up to?
Well, I just been getting a little bit of research done, and we had a nice snowfall last night, so I'm kind of enjoying the snow.
Yeah. Where are you based out of now?
So I'm in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, which is located on Cape Cod. But I grew up in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, so I'm used to kind of long winters and, snow that actually sticks. And so here when it snows in Boston, it tends to rain down here, and when it does snow, the snow is kind of slushy and it doesn't stick. And so I kind of yearn for the days, when I was growing up in Rhinelander and those nice snowfalls.
I know, I was just up there yesterday and they had, or over the weekend, they just got like kind of one of their first big snowfalls of the year. It's kind of late for that, but they had all the snowmobilers out and everything. But yeah, they're kind of getting less and less snow now too these days. Have you talked to anybody from back in Rhinelander?
Well, I'm in touch with a few high school friends, but I hadn't heard that. That's interesting.
Well, I guess last winter was really bad all across Wisconsin, and this winter's like kind of here and there. But yeah, that is the best snow, isn't it? When you got you kind of can walk around the woods and you feel like you got a sound blanket all over you. You can't hear anything,
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, in the winter you can cross country ski and get back into some of those areas that are, kind of swampy areas that you'd never go in the summer because they're swampy and they're too mosquito-y. But when you're there in the winter, they're incredibly peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah, right in the bogs, right? Yeah. Like where, you go there, you can get like ankle high and just muck, but in the winter, it's a whole new terrain you can go around. It's very cool.
Yeah.
Before we get too far in, I just want to give people a sense of sort of your history with plastics, with microplastics in particular, and just environmental studies in general. Would you mind just getting everyone up to speed on that?
Sure. Actually, I only started working with microplastics a few years ago, but I've throughout my career I've studied the ocean circulation from the standpoint of kind of following water, little bits of water as they move around. So it kind of harkens back to the old days when people who wanted to map out ocean currents would put a message in a bottle, throw it in the water, and hope that bottle would wash up somewhere, and the person would read the message and get back to them and say, well, okay, so this message washed up on a certain date in a certain place. And then you could try to think about the ocean current that might have carried it on that journey. And so,
well, was that how people mapped ocean currents back in the day? Was the message in the bottle thing?
That was one day, and then through estimations of ship drift, so people like Benjamin Franklin knew a lot about the Gulf Stream just from ship logs, and kind of figuring out, from the wind and the positions that there must be a strong current there. And he actually drew a sketch of the Gulf Stream, which was amazingly accurate.
Wow. It's always crazy when you think about those dudes back then and what they were able to piece together with like not much of anything but observation, no computers, just all through observation like that. It's pretty wild,
Yeah. Yeah.
Even when you look at those old school calculators with the little beads and everything, you're like, I need AI to tell me how to use this thing,
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy that they were able to figure stuff out like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, you can imagine a journey imagine you just take a very small little parcel of seawater, and you color it somehow, and then you just follow it. And that parcel may start off at the ocean surface. It may make its way up into the polar regions, and it might sink, and then it might flow throughout the abyssal ocean and might get into the Antarctic regions, and then it might go around Antarctica many times, and then eventually it might go into the Pacific Ocean and into the deep Pacific, and it might be 1,000 or 2,000 years before that little piece of water actually gets back to the ocean surface. And
wow.
And so it's a really interesting journey, and I've always been kind of interested in what happens along that journey. And that's similar to what happened, when you think about the journey that a microplastic particle might take as well.
Yeah. So what, first of all, before we get into the microplastics of it all, was there something about growing up in Rhinelander that got you interested in ocean currents? Very far from the ocean, close to the Great Lakes, you got some rivers. And I suppose if you got in the right river, you could make it to the Mississippi and then make it to the ocean and around the world if you really wanted to. But what got you into that?
Yeah, it was partly my parents restricting my television. So that one of the shows that they actually let us watch, was National Geographic. So we got to see those Jacques Cousteau,
oh yeah,
pieces with them scuba diving, and and so that kind of got me interested in the ocean in general. And I suppose that there were novels and movies like Treasure Island and Mutiny on the Bounty, Tales of the Sea. So the ocean always had a kind of romantic fascination for me. But I didn't really get into it. So, when I was in high school and when I was a senior, I was trying to figure out what to do. I was fairly good at math. And there were some older kids that came back and said, well, if you're good at math and you want to actually get a job, you should go into engineering. So I went to Madison in the
Go Badgers.
environment.
Me too.
Yeah. So I was in the civil and environmental engineering program. My in-state tuition at my first semester was $200.
Come on.
Yes, $200.
Really?
1971.
Holy, 70s was a good time to be alive, I guess.
Yeah, right. I have no idea what it is now, but
it's like 15 grand a year, I think. Maybe.
15, okay. Yeah.
I don't know. So, anyways.
Yeah. So, as I went through that engineering school, I was taking classes on kind of on the flow of water, rivers, floods, channels, engineering applications, and I got very interested in kind of the physics of the flow of water, and so that kind of led me into the ocean, because there's a lot of interesting aspects of ocean circulation from the standpoint of basic physics. And so then for graduate school, I enrolled in a program that we have with MIT, and I got my graduate degree there, and eventually came to work at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is where I am now.
Very cool. And what was it sort of when you talked about like the oceans and everything and getting into that? Have you ever done scuba diving?
Yes, actually, there was a class you could learn to scuba dive in the swimming pool in Madison. And so I did that, and then we all went on a trip down to the Florida Keys, diving on the reefs there.
Cool.
And I remember, and that was kind of my first experience with the ocean. And I remember it was right after the movie Jaws had come out.
Yeah, great timing.
So I was terrified of sharks. I was really scared of sharks, but That whole week we only saw one shark the whole time. So
Yeah. Isn't that I went a friend of mine's a marine biologist down in the Bahamas, and I went
yeah.
down and she's like kind of rebuilding the reefs down there. So I went down there and did it, and we went down and didn't see a shark. And then we got back up there. This was like the first time we went. I was like, "Oh, I didn't see a shark." She's like, "Don't worry, they all saw you." And I was like, "Oh God," that's sort of the shark haven right over there in the Bahamas. Especially, we saw this big sea turtle, and if you see a sea turtle, that's like tiger shark snack.
Oh,
So they're probably around there somewhere. But
yeah.
anyways, like when I first started scuba diving, that's when I really became aware of like the ocean currents and how bad they can really like mess everything up if you're scuba diving, kind of like Lake Michigan with the riptide, how that can just carry you away so fast. It was sort of like that kind of moment scuba diving. Were you able to like sort of see I mean, this is going to sound like it's a stupid question. I'm going to ask anyway. Were you able to see the water sort of from a different perspective underwater as it pertains to the currents and everything?
Yeah. So where we were diving, which was on John Pennekamp Park, there weren't really strong tidal currents there, but the waves were, the surge of the waves carrying you back and forth across the reef was definitely noticeable.
Right. Yeah.
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 But
That'll move you pretty good.
yeah, but I swim a lot here, and so we have pretty strong tidal currents here where I live in Woods Hole, and you have to take those into consideration when you're swimming. Mostly they're along the shore, so they're not, for the most part, they're not going to take you out into deep water. But you can get in the water and start swimming. You see the shoreline going by, and you're feeling great about yourself. You're making a lot of progress, and then you realize that there's this strong tidal current carrying you, and you have to swim back against that. So
Yeah. It's like swimming on a treadmill, you
yeah.
know? Well, and then real quick back when you saw the shark, did you see it?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of shark was it?
So it was a lemon shark. It was fairly good size. It was maybe 9, 10 feet. But the people that were running the boats told us that shark was hanging around all the time, and divers were used to it, and it wasn't dangerous. So I didn't see any great whites or tiger sharks or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Did they tell you what to do if you see a shark, what you're supposed to do?
They might have told us. I can't remember. I remember when I saw it, I kind of swam away and I found my partner and I kind of pointed, and I made the word shark. And so we kind of swam off
Oh,
in the opposite direction.
okay.
Um,
Got it.
but I did, remember in Jaws, at least in the movie, the one, the person that gets away is the person that was actually scuba diving. Richard Dreyfuss
Yes.
swims down to the
Yes.
bottom, and apparently the shark ignored him.
Yeah. Smart guy.
Yeah.
Smart guy.
Right.
Yeah. And then he had to do his whole process of coming back up. I forget what it's called, but it's your lungs don't explode, that whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
Anyways, well, that's good. Get a little scuba talk in here. So what got you into then microplastics?
Well, I guess it was kind of a natural extension of what I was already doing. So if you think about the movement of a very small particle, it's going to be carried by ocean currents to a great extent, but it's also doing other things. So it might be buoyant, it might want to float up to the surface, or it might want to sink. It might have lift, the same thing that happens with airplane wings.
Mm-hmm.
It might drag a little bit of fluid along with it as it's moving. That's an effect called added mass. It might be influenced by the rotation of the Earth. And so there's kind of a complicated set of forces that are acting on this little particle that kind of determine its trajectory. And I was particularly interested in cases when certain types of ocean current could cause things to kind of congregate, so that things would concentrate in a small area.
Like the Great Ocean Patch?
Well, so that's the example everyone knows about, and that's at the surface. Yeah, the Great Ocean Garbage Patches is a good example. But I was interested in what's happening beneath the surface of the ocean. Are there places where these things can congregate. We would call them attractors. And so we started looking, some of my colleagues and I started looking at very idealized models of very simple types of circulation, say something that might be similar to what you'd find in an ocean eddy. And we found that the microplastics would collect in certain parts, very limited parts of that flow field. Sort of the same way that tea leaves, if you have a cup of tea and you're stirring the tea and the tea leaves will gather in the middle of the cup right at the bottom.
Yeah.
So with these circulations, we were finding that the microplastics would gather around a kind of a strange, imagine taking a string with two ends, you tie the two ends together so you have kind of a loop of string. And the microplastics would kind of be attracted to that geometric object, and they'd all gather around this kind of closed loop.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's that's important if you're going out there and looking for microplastics beneath the surface. If you're sampling and you're not sampling in that string, you might conclude that there aren't any microplastics. Whereas if you happen to make a measurement right where that attractor lies, then there's tons of microplastics there, and then you might conclude, well, the ocean's saturated with microplastics. So that was one reason I was interested in it is that this might tell you where to actually look.
Yeah, and because we've. I was reading this article that, saying that there's so much microplastic and nanoplastic out there that it's in like all of our blood and all of our brains. It's in all our bodies. So it's definitely out there. And I guess the question is, where do you see it congregating the most? And is there a possibility of getting it out of the water system?
Yeah, that's one of the million-dollar questions, right? So, on one hand, it seems daunting, right? Because the ocean is just so big. It's, it's 7/10 of the Earth's surface, and the average depth is around 2.5 miles. So it's a huge volume. And, thinking about filtering things from that volume, really, really small particles, it almost seems impossible. But people are exploring nanotechnology, and they're trying to develop filters that can selectively filter out microplastic particles and not filter out other small organisms like, phytoplankton or zooplankton. So that's something that's promising. I think it's probably a long way in the future. But if it's something that can be done, then again, you'd like to know where these plastics are concentrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so where do they concentrate?
Well, so you mentioned the garbage patches, right? So we have these big gyres in the ocean. There's 5 of them. The big subtropical gyres. There's one in the North Atlantic, one in the South Atlantic. There's one in the Indian Ocean, and there's 2 in the Pacific. And you find larger concentrations of floating plastics at the centers of these gyres.
And a gyre, for idiots like me, would be defined as?
So it's a big flow that swirls around. So the one in the North Atlantic, it swirls around in a clockwise direction.
Okay.
And it's thousands of miles across. If you put a bottle, a message in a bottle, and took the time that would circulate around once, that might be like 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Time. So it's a big, slow-moving gyre.
Okay.
And the water at the surface tends to move towards the center of that gyre. And so anything that's floating gets carried towards the center. But it doesn't actually collect right in the very center. It will collect in a pretty big region. Something that's about twice the size of Texas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so you find, you find larger concentrations of floating plastic and microplastics at the surface of those gyres. It's not, Charlie, it's not though like you would go out in a boat there and you just see something that looks like a garbage dump.
Right.
There might be places where you see floating bottles and so on, but it's not like, it's not like this awful place. It's just more if you actually measure what's out there, you count the number of plastics, you just find greater concentrations there than you do in other parts of the open ocean.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah,
So a lot of the microplastic in the ocean is going toward these gyres in the various oceans. That's on the
right.
surface. What
Yeah,
about under the surface?
yeah, that's a big mystery. So that we know that there's a lot of the heavier plastics, they just sink to the bottom and they get into the sediment, and that's been well measured. Even in the deepest trenches in the ocean, you can find microplastics in the sediment. But there's some plastics that they have a density that's fairly close to seawater, and so they might be just slightly buoyant, or just a little bit heavier than the water, and so they can be suspended for long periods of time in the ocean. And those are the ones that I'm interested in. But when you actually go out and look for them, you can find very, very small numbers, and then you can go to another spot where you find really large numbers. So, for example, one survey that I saw took a bunch of water samples at, like, I'll say 1,000 meters depth, and they hardly found any microplastics. But then I talked to another team from Japan, and they took some samples from underneath the Kurashio, which is it's a big current there. And at about the same depth, they were finding like 1,000 particles for every cubic meter. So we just have samples here and there, very sparse samples, and so we really don't know a lot about the subsurface distributions of microplastics. But we do know that there are certain places where you find a lot of them.
And we should step back and say that how do these microplastics get into the ocean to begin with? Like, what is a microplastic? Where does it come from? And what can people who are interested in just stopping their part in creating more microplastics, what can they do?
Yeah, so a lot of microplastics. Well, first of all, microplastics are small bits of plastic. Kind of the largest size that we think of as a microplastic is 5 millimeters. Okay, so a millimeter is what? It's about the size of the thickness of your toenail, something like that. So the larger ones we can see, they range in size all the way down to a micron, which is like 1,000th of a millimeter. So those are ones we can't see. And then you have ones that are even smaller than that. Those are the nanoplastics that you talk about. Those are hard to find. We don't know too much about those. And where do they come from? There's a lot of different sources. So they can come from the disintegration of things like plastic bottles and plastic bags. You think about a bag that blows into a stream or something like that, and then it travels down that stream. It's subject to mechanical stresses from the water and the waves. It's being hit by ultraviolet sunlight, and so it can slowly break up into small pieces. Or you can take like a plastic container. I went to the hardware store the other day, and I was looking at tools, and I saw there were some wrenches there they came in these plastic containers.
Dude, nothing pisses me off more when you have a pipe wrench wrapped in plastic. Like, it's a pipe wrench. I think it's going to be fine. You know?
And then you take it home and you try to cut into it with your scissors, and it's hard and brittle, and even when you're cutting into it, you're creating a lot of little tiny plastic shards. Those are microplastics.
That's amazing to me. The crap people wrap in plastic. Like, I got some knives, like a knife block, and every single knife they individually wrap, like, the handle in plastic. I get if you wrap the blade, you want to protect it with some, but I don't know. I feel like cardboard would be a lot easier than but just the amount of unnecessary plastic stuff that you order. Like, you get a shirt and it's in a plastic bag. Why? I don't know. Yeah, I'm on my soapbox now, but I'm glad you brought that up at the hardware store. Of all things, I don't need wrapped in plastic. It's a friggin' wrench,
Yeah, right. And then there's fabrics. There's like fleece jackets. And I'm as guilty as anyone at wearing those fleece jackets. They're comfortable. They're great. But they do shed a lot of little microplastic fibers when you put them in the washing machine, and that stuff, it's gonna make it into your municipal wastewater treatment plant, and some of it will will get filtered out probably, and some won't, and then so it'll end up in a stream and eventually into the ocean.
That's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people know that. So what kind of clothes would have microplastics in them, and are some clothes worse at shedding microplastics than others?
Yeah, so the plastic is the PET you've probably heard of, which is a type of polyethylene, and so these these kind of sweaters or zip down jackets, a lot of are made from that, and it's polyester. And if you look closely at it, you can see that there's a lot of tiny little fibers there, and that's basically a type of plastic.
That's on all kinds of like is spandex there's a lot of plastic in the clothes, but does some come off more in the wash? Like if you wash them cold or something, does that help? Is it the heat that releases them, or they just release all the time?
Yeah, I think it's probably just the mechanical stress of being in a washing machine being turned around that turns them loose. There was one of the companies that makes these, to their credit, did some experiments where they put one of these things in a washing machine for 24 hours. The reasoning being that that's about the time that an average jacket is going to spend in a washing machine over its lifetime. Maybe you wash it once a year or something like that for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that, and then they counted the number of microfibers that got shed from that jacket, and it was in the hundreds of thousands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So just don't wash your clothes.
Well, that's, yeah. And then, you probably have to be careful of how to dispose of them too.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you can't, they're just a problem anywhere they are. How do you dispose of them? Do you have any ideas on that?
We have every once in a while in our town, there's a collection of certain types of plastics that you can't just put in our regular recycle. Like, recently there was a styrofoam. You could go to the high school and leave your styrofoam stuff there. And there's also collections like that specifically for fabrics too. So you can be on the lookout for those if you're wherever you live. If they do that, you can take advantage.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you do as much as you personally can. It's probably not going to stop this is real tragedy of the commons. Like, yeah, maybe I can be looking out for that styrofoam recycling or that fleece jacket recycling. But when most people don't even know that that's what's happening with fleece jackets, you can see real quick. Like, what role do you think sort of the companies that are making those things should have in like telling people about that, and also kind of cleaning up what has been put out in the environment?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get too down on the companies. I think it might have been Patagonia that did this experiment, and so that's to their credit, and I think these companies are right now, given the interest, of the health risks of microplastics, are probably thinking about developing new fabrics, maybe fabrics that don't actually shed the microplastics or are based on some other material. But, in general, I think we can do a lot just with trying to avoid single-use plastics.
Oh, like plastic straws?
Plastic straws, plastic cups, those styrofoam plastic cups that, you go down, if you work in an office, you go down to the coffee machine and they have those styrofoam plastic cups. Typically, those things just get thrown away after one use.
Yeah.
Plastic bags, you can reuse plastic bags many, many times.
So eliminate the single-use plastics. That's really good. What about, is there any way to kind of filter out, like, let's say with the washing machine, and the way kind of water works, and can the filter go in the washing machine? Since it's hard to filter once it's in the ocean, you have to worry about all those other things. But is there a filter that you could put in the washing machine itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I have no idea.
You ever think about like inventing one of those things, or like how would you even go about doing it? Or is that not really in your specialty?
That's not my wheelhouse, but if there's a lot of inventors out there, I could see developing something like that, and then maybe you take it on Shark Tank and get some funding for it.
There you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mark Cuban, throw $1 million for 500% of the company and then sold. What is it in your studying of the microplastics and nanoplastics in the water system? What are you really like? What's kind of your holy grail? What are you really hoping to figure out? What gets you really excited about it?
So I would like to be able to tell people where in the ocean, the whole three-dimensional ocean, where microplastics are collecting.
Because once you know where they're collecting, then you can go get them, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. And I'd also like to be able to tell people where the plastics are actually going. That's part of the story too. So, the estimates of microplastics that are getting into the ocean every year are something like 5 million tons to 12 million tons. So just lots of plastics. But when you go out and you measure or you estimate how much of that stuff is floating at the surface, it's a very small percentage of that. So where's the rest going? And so, there's kind of a budget there. We'd like to figure out, how much is going in, how much is staying in, how much is going, where is it going, how much is washing up on beaches, how much is going into the sediment. Of the stuff that's going into sediment, is it possible that any of that can get resuspended? Questions like that.
It's kind of with the ocean being so big, it's how deep is the deepest part of the ocean? Do we know?
So the deepest part is about 10 kilometers, which is about 35,000 feet.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Man.
And they found microplastics down there. So that's in the Challenger Trench, I believe. And so some of those really deep trenches in the Western Pacific, they found microplastics at the bottom of those trenches.
So we know they're getting all the way down there, huh?
Yeah.
They can sink. That's crazy. Yeah. Folks, I want to let you know the Cripescast is powered by Everlight Solar. We got those solar panels up on the roof, and they've been powering this studio for years now, saving us some cash money and also trying to help save the planet a little bit. And if you want to save that money too, go to everlightsolar.com and sign up for your free consultation. And also, ladies and gents, Valentine's Day, it's coming up. And, I guess it's, I don't know if you're going to have time to get this stuff off the Man to Walk Man website. Forget it. Either way, maybe it's a belated Valentine's Day. We got the brandy old-fashioned glasses, the one where you can measure the brandy with a perch, a walleye, a muskie. Those are up on the website. We've got cribbage boards. We got hoodies. We got sweatshirts, T-shirts, the whole deal. By the way, a lot of the shirts are 100% cotton, so they don't put the microplastics into the water, okay? So there you go. Good job, Charlie. Pat yourself on the back. Anyways, you can get it off manitowalkminute.com. And, there you go. That's a real help for this whole podcast deal. All right, back to my conversation with Dr. Pratt. What do you think about people who say there's aliens in the ocean? You think we got any motherships down there?
Well, if you can show me some evidence, I'll consider it. I haven't seen any evidence yet.
Okay. I'm just throwing everything at you, just seeing what we can do here.
Yeah.
What is the weirdest thing you've ever found about the ocean?
The weirdest thing, I'm not sure it's the weirdest thing, but the thing that really kind of got my attention is that about half of the oxygen that we breathe actually comes from the ocean.
Really?
Yes.
And how do we get that from the ocean?
So the ocean at the surface has phytoplankton, which are these small organisms that use photosynthesis, and so they're using carbon and they're releasing oxygen just like trees.
Oh wow!
And as it turns out, quite a bit of oxygen.
Holy smokes! Yeah, I didn't know that either. That's crazy.
Yeah.
How much impact is climate change having on our oceans right now?
Well, so our oceans, our oceans actually absorb a fair amount of the CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere. I'm going to say something around 30%. And that's because carbon dioxide can dissolve in water. and then that carbon that gets in to the ocean gets used, as part of what we call the carbon cycle. So there's organisms that use it, and sometimes so it becomes part of the food chain, and then those organisms will, they'll die, or they'll poop it out, and it'll sink down to the bottom and become part of the sediment. So a lot of the carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere actually gets into the ocean. And but the other thing is that actually makes the ocean more acidic.
And then that's when you get when you see those coral bleachings, and so then the coral gets bleached. So like this it's kind of very complicated. It's really not that complicated, but for your average person who's just scrolling on their phone all day, what are like the big things that you think like you should care about this? Why? So the ocean takes in it becomes more acidic. The coral reefs get bleached. We hear that happens, but then what does that mean for your average person?
Yeah. So for your average person that loves coral reefs, that's a big red flag, right? Because a lot of the coral reefs have been bleached. You look at the Great Barrier Reef, and that's been bleached, and that's also a function of the water getting warmer too, which is another consequence of atmospheric warming. And then of course when the water gets more acidic, it makes it harder for shellfish to grow shells, and so it impacts the food that we get from the ocean.
So basically, it like messes the whole food system up, because like if shellfish have less hard shells, then I mean that not only impacts our enjoyment of those fish, but it also probably makes that species more susceptible. Couldn't that collapse the whole food chain of the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of taking me out of my realm, but yeah, that's what in general, that's what people are worried about. Another thing that people could think about is, the effects of sea level rise. And about half of sea level rise is actually just due to the thermal expansion of the ocean. So the water gets warmer and it expands a little bit. That causes sea level to rise. And so there's places in the Pacific that are being lost, beautiful coral atolls that are probably going to be lost within the next 50 years. There's an island nation called Kiribati in the Pacific, which includes Christmas Island and about 30 other atolls. And the highest elevations of these places are maybe 6, 8, 10 feet above sea level, and so they can't really tolerate much sea level rise. And I've been to these places. I love to go bone fishing, so I've been fishing for bonefish on Christmas Island a bunch of times, and now I kind of have to face the prospect that it might not even be there, by the end of the century. And it's just an incredibly beautiful place. It's got palm trees, and beautiful flats and lots of marine life, and so those places are going away. The government of Kiribati has even purchased land on Fiji, which is a more mountainous island, and they're planning for the populations on those islands to eventually move there.
Wow. Yeah, that's and then the Maldives, that's another one, right? Where these are like the modern day Atlantises. And well, then so they are already planning on relocating their people because of sea level rise. What about like Florida? You always see the hurricanes picking up intensity. You see more flooding. What does that have to do with climate change and increased ocean temperature?
Yeah, well, of course, the hurricanes kind of feed on heat that they get from the oceans, and so as the oceans warm, the hurricanes could potentially get more powerful, and they can, and it's complicated too. I mean, they might get started at higher latitude than they do now. The hydrological cycle increases as the planet warms, so there's more rainfall, more evaporation, more water cycling through the atmosphere. And so, the expectations is that the hurricanes are going to get stronger. I'm not sure about the numbers. I don't know if the number of hurricanes is going to increase or not. And then you combine that with, with slow sea level rise. And so that's going to impact a lot of coastal areas in places like Florida, or, places like Bangladesh, where there's a lot of people living at, very close to sea level.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the sort of the microplastics of it all, is there something about microplastics that sort of they're sort of toxin sponges, kind of like they absorb toxins? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and we have a group here at Woods Hole that works on that. So when plastics are manufactured, there's a lot of additives that can be introduced, and it might make the plastic softer or harder, or give it some color, or make it more resistant to UV rays. And there's a huge variety of additives, something like 10,000 that can go into plastics. And about a third of those are associated with some sort of health concern too. So so right from the manufacturing point, there are additives that could potentially leach out, like if the plastic got into the tissue of a fish or something like that, it might make its way out. But as you say, there's also some evidence that plastics can kind of attract toxins that are already in the environment. And then the same thing can happen, and that plastic gets ingested by an organism, a fish or something like that, and then that might be harmful to the fish. But I think we're kind of scratching the surface of these health risks right now. Some of the studies are very worrisome, but there's a lot of research that we still need to do.
Right. But at the end of the day, there's so much plastic in the ocean essentially right now that it's in all of our water, and therefore it's in the air as well. And it's gotten into our bloodstream. It's gotten into our brains have plastic in them. It's in all of our bodies. And is there anything people can do can they put a water filter in? Is there something they can do for their individual water intake to help in the near term while, hopefully science catches up with getting these microplastics out of the water system?
Yeah, so I don't know what's out there in terms of water filters. Certainly the filters that are in everyday use are going to filter out the larger microplastics. But the really small ones, which are the ones we know less about, and the ones we kind of worry the most about, might not get filtered out. So, are there developments in industry right now to try to make filters that can get out the very smallest ones? I'm not sure. That's a good question. But yeah, the best thing to do is to get them right at the source, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not wait till they're in your river or end up in your ocean where it's really hard to filter them out.
Yeah, and the source, I mean, it's a very small percentage of plastic that actually ends up getting recycled. You see the
Yeah.
sort of recycling label on a plastic bottle. I
Yeah.
think only 3% of plastic in the United States ever gets recycled?
Yeah, the numbers I've seen is like 4 or 5%. I think it's closer to 9% worldwide. But yeah, it's not a lot. And some of that, goes into making. It doesn't go into making another plastic cup. It goes into maybe making some fuel, or maybe it goes into making another plastic object that you can actually only use once and not actually recycle again.
There's a lot of energy, it seems, going into putting a recycling symbol on plastic,
Yeah.
which allows the consumer to think this is recyclable. I'm not kind of doing anything bad, but it's kind of a big lie, isn't it? Like pretty much if only 9% of plastic gets recycled globally, it's sort of like that's kind of a lie, is it not?
Yeah, I think in the sense that a lot of people believe that, all you have to do is put a plastic object in your recycling bin, and it's going to get recycled. You're going to get the same amount of new plastic out of it. In our town, there's a lot of plastics that we actually can't recycle for kind of silly reasons. So if you get takeout at a restaurant, sometimes the containers are these black plastic containers, and we cannot put those in our recycle bin. And the reason is that the scanners that read the little numbers don't work on black plastic.
Oh, nice. Glad we thought of that.
How crazy is that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we can't recycle anything that has a dimension smaller than about a credit card, because they'll fall through the there's some line of or conveyor belt, and the small pieces will fall through that.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like that that's just kind of silly.
So really, at the end of the day, it's probably just looking to companies that are maybe wrapping wrenches in plastic for God knows what reason to just not do that. Like, what is kind of a solution for people to sort of push for if the recycling is not really working? Is it pressuring companies, or what do you think people can do?
Yeah. So, I don't work with the chemical companies, but I have a colleague here at WHOI who talks to the chemical companies a lot. And from what I hear from him, there's a lot of emphasis now on trying to improve the whole recycling thing, and making it easier and more cost effective to recycle. That's where their concentration is. And one way I think you can do that is you can kind of maybe simplify or standardize the manufacturing process. Do you really need 10,000 different additives? And that's one of the things that just makes it very complicated to recycle when you have all these different pieces of plastic with, different chemistry. How do you recycle those with one or two processes? So kind of maybe simplifying that and standardizing that would be a good thing.
So yeah, instead of like the real thin like it's all kind of like milk carton plastic, in other words. Like something like that, where you would say it would all be kind of this kind of plastic. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, right. But there's so many. There's fishing line, there's fishing nets, there's milk cartons, there's plastics and medical equipment, there's credit cards. There's PVC piping, there's acrylic. So if you just look at all the different kind of plastics that you see in your everyday life, there's a huge assortment there.
Yeah.
So it's more than just milk cartons and PET bottles and so on.
But you're saying across the board, sort of standardize, like you have like, I don't know, 100 groups as opposed to 10,000 groups of additives.
Yeah.
And they're looking into doing that, the industry is?
Well, I can't say specifically what they're doing because I haven't really spoken with them, but I know that they're thinking of ways of making recycling easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think they're looking at reducing the volume of plastics that are being produced every year.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't that annoy you? It's like, why not make glass, dude? Like if it's sort of the supply and demand thing, but if it's kind of poisoning everybody, you would think that you would at some point want to make another choice or a better choice, but it doesn't seem like that's always the case,
Yeah, well, if the companies aren't paying any cost for the pollution or any harm to human health, then there isn't a financial incentive to do that.
It's kind of what drives us all is money, right?
Well, yeah, it certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah. But then we all pay for it on the other end, because then you get, whatever you get from having all these toxins in you, we're just going to have higher healthcare bills so these companies can make more money profiting on the plastic.
Yeah, I mean that's the worry. There is the United Nations has been trying to put together a treaty on plastics, and some of the experts will tell you that recycling is great and improved recycling is going to improve things quite a bit, but ultimately you have to try to reduce just the total number of plastics that are being produced, and that's part of this treaty. The treaty is being negotiated starting a couple of years ago. More recently, it's got hung up. I think there was a meeting in South Korea last year, and so there are certain countries that want to have fairly stringent restrictions, like companies in Western Europe, and then some of the oil-producing um, countries, want to have more lenient restrictions, and so there's arguments going on there. They're going to meet again at some point this year, and so that's one positive thing in the works. If that can go through, is kind of a global treaty that might limit the amount of plastic that's produced, and maybe say something about recycling.
The big thing I think that people don't understand is that plastics are um, come from the oil companies. The oil companies are the ones making plastic. Can you explain that connection?
Yeah, so typically plastic, most of it, I'm going to say 98%, comes from oil. The oil gets pumped up, goes to a refinery. It gets separated into different components. Those components tend to have smaller molecules. And then there's a chemical process that creates polymers, long chain molecules. And then you introduce these additives that might make the plastic softer or harder. And then the raw plastic, it might get sold to someone that fabricates plastic cups in these little nurdles. So a little nurdle it's actually a microplastic. It's a little pea-size piece of plastic. And so, if you have a company that's fabricating plastic, you might be buying bagfuls of these things, and that's where the plastic comes from.
Okay, interesting. And what about the sort of the compostable plastic that you see people make? Is that do you know anything about that? Is it actually better than the regular plastic?
My impression is that it is. I'm not a chemist, but I've had some of those. I accidentally left one of those compostable plastic bags in a drawer for a couple of years. And when I get it out, I tried to pick it up and it just kind of disintegrated into tiny little pieces. So it is breaking down. That part is good.
Hopefully it's breaking down to something better than
microplastic. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to not be cynical about it, hopefully, I think the United States political system controls really what the world does in a lot of ways. And so I think if people understand that, hey, we're all getting poisoned by these microplastics, maybe there is something where we can all come together to let our Congress people know, our senators know that this is an issue. And then it doesn't have to be a right or a left thing. But I think if even Donald Trump gets word that this is what a lot of people want, they don't want to be poisoned by this, and these are people who are worried about being poisoned by everything. Like some people, they don't want the government to mandate like a vaccine, and yet big business is essentially mandating that you eat plastic. So I think people don't want to be controlled by the government. They don't want to be controlled by big business. So I think just making that clear, and then people making their voice known, is how, you make any sort of change in this kind of very, very divisive political climate. So I think having hope that people get this information is sort of what we have to rely on at this point. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about that, about how to see actual change in this deal?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I strongly agree that it shouldn't be a political issue. And I would hesitate to say that we're being poisoned by these things. I think there's a lot of cause for concern. There are studies that are coming out that are suggestive of health risks. But I think we're just scratching the surface to find out what the risks are to human health and to ocean biology and so on. But you mentioned plastics in the human brain, and people have done autopsies that have revealed microplastics in the human brain. we don't know what the health risks are. It doesn't sound good, right? And
No.
it's something I'd like, if I have plastics in my brain, I'd like to know what the health risks are, and I don't want to wait 20 years. So I think there's a lot of need for research right now. So I don't think that people should panic, but they should be aware of the fact that the plastics are everywhere, um, and that there are a fair number of studies that suggest that there could be health risks. So there is cause for concern. There's strong motivation for practicing conservation, and like you say, to let our representatives in Washington know kind of how we feel.
Yeah, because what you also have to remember is that the oil companies for years have been funding studies raising doubts about climate change and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very likely that they will fund studies that raise doubts about how impactful plastic is. Just like the cigarette companies, the tobacco companies, they funded studies that said 5 out of 7 doctors recommend Newport, whatever, or Salem's. They actually had ads saying that doctors recommended cigarettes back in the day. So I would not underestimate, just historically speaking, the motivation of these companies to delay any sort of actual movement or consensus that their product is hurting people. And I hope people kind of can keep that in mind as they go through these things. But yeah, early studies do say these things are impacting us, could be, for instance, leading to the rise in colon cancer in young people is on the rise. And they don't have a definitive reason for that. But one of the potential things is the microplastics in our water and in our air. So, these are the things for people to keep in mind as they, and yes, it might be harsh to say that these companies are poisoning us, but especially since we're consuming it. We I got plastic on these shoelaces right here. We're all a part of it, but I think we just all have to at least know the facts and understand those. And then we can all maybe move forward in a good direction.
Yeah, I would just ask people to try to make evidence-based decisions when they're, kind of reaching their own personal judgment on these things. And, if I have to have a tooth pulled, I'm not going to call a plumber, right? I'm going to go to the dentist. And if I'm going to have water leaking from a faucet, I'm going to call a plumber. I'm not going to call a dentist. And so when it comes to things like climate change or the medical implications of plastics, I would just look at what the experts are saying, people that have spent their career studying these questions.
Yeah, and so far, the experts, at least from what I've read, say that there is leading evidence, but not officially conclusive yet.
Yeah, for example, there is a study out of Italy looking at microplastics in the plaque that builds up in our arteries, age of all things, and they were finding some of the patients actually had microplastics in their plaque, and those people tended to have a higher risk, like 5 times the higher risk of stroke or heart disease, and so that's just one study. But it's, you see things like that and it's very concerning.
Yeah, it is. Well, hopefully people can, make some, just make it clear that they want some change in this, because otherwise business will drive it. And then we'll keep going kind of off the cliff as we sort of do. But before I let you go, we have this, and you being from Rhinelander, I feel like you'll understand this, but it's a question we ask everybody. It's what makes you say cripes?
Well, okay. So if we want to make this about Wisconsin, I would say this, there's this invasive weed that's gotten into the lakes in northern Wisconsin. I can't remember what it's called, but it's any lake that has a boat ramp is liable to have these. And there's a beautiful lake called Razorback Lake up in St. Earth that I fished in a lot when I was a kid, and I took my paddleboard out there a couple of years ago, and the whole northern part of that lake is choked with this weed.
Yeah.
It grows from the bottom right up to the surface, and then it kind of
Yes.
along the surface. It's hard to get your paddleboard through it. And so that was, that was enough to make me say cripes.
Yeah. So the next time you pull your boat out, make sure you empty all the water before you take it to another lake.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that screwed up your paddleboarding experience, but hope you come back to Wisconsin soon. There are a lot of lakes here that don't have that still, so hopefully you can get back and enjoy it.
That's good. And if I could I just say hello to all my high school friends?
Yes.
Who are still living
shout
in
out?
Rhineland, or all my cousins in Milwaukee and friends in Milwaukee. I miss you all.
That's awesome. You miss them all. Well, you got to come back soon. Okay.
Okay.
I'm actually I'm Zooming with you right in Milwaukee now. So if you come back, come to the studio. We'll do a follow-up on this.
Okay, that sounds great. And if you're ever out in Cape Cod, or anyone listening, and you want to visit the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, get a tour of our research ships, just contact me.
Yeah, that would be super cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yeah, very fun. Very fun. All right, watch for deer now.
Okay, see ya.
All right, see ya. Well, there you have it, folks. If you're in Cape Cod, look up Dr. Larry Pratt and give him a holler, and go check out all the cool stuff that they're working on. And hopefully he gives us a holler the next time he's in Wisconsin. That would be great. And shout out to all his buddies in Rhinelander and Milwaukee as well. And shout out to you guys. Thank you for listening to the Cripescast, and get in touch with your elected officials about this microplastic thing. I think we all can make some change if we really want to. So anyway, thank you all for listening. Thanks to Kelly Maraca and Hannah Milos for producing and editing. And you guys watch out for them deer. We'll see you next week.
So roll out the barrel and get the band brewing. Life's got you down, just keep her moving. It's on Wisconsin, the Badgers say it's the old Wisconsin Jubilee.
You know, sometimes when you're ice fishing, you put your foot in the walleye hole and go ass over tea kettle, and you think you're done. No, you gotta keep her moving.